pose for the camera.
It was totally because when we do our video clips, they're always like, something like that. So making it easy for our videographers to work with.
What is it? Is this number 4?
No, I think it's like 5 or 6, maybe.
All right, good talk. So we don't know which one it is.
Somewhere between 3 and 6.
Go ahead.
I said it's somewhere between 3 and 6.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying something else. I got to manage this LinkedIn thing. It takes like 30 to 45 seconds. Oh boy. There it is. Okay. Now we're live.
Oh, we weren't live before.
We were, but now we're ready.
Okay. Debatable.
So maybe we'll just talk real quick about the 6-inch problem, which was kind of funny. We were laughing behind the scenes, Rachel and I. There's a lot of jokes.
Immature.
Yes.
I mean, this doesn't have to be so serious. Too stuffy, too serious. That's why we're entrepreneurs. We get to do what we want and say what we want for the most part.
For the most part, yes. All right, well, before we hop in, let me tell you this dad joke.
Why don't you tell people who you are?
People know who we are. My name is Darren, founder, CEO of the Canthal Group. Who are you, Rachel?
I'm Rachel. I'm the COO and Women's Executive and Leadership Coach for the Canthal Group. And clearly, listeners would know who we are. But it's also good practice to let people know and say hello.
Okay.
Okay. We'll work on that introduction later.
All right, dad joke. I saw 2 mimes having sex the other day. They were doing unspeakable things to each other.
You are lame. Your dad jokes are getting like pushing closer and closer to PG, where they're G, and they're like, now you're pushing it a little bit.
Well, I figured since we're talking about 6-inch problems and the phallic nature of that it sounded pretty good to do a sex joke.
It was appropriate. That was a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about really perspective is where we started from. And for those listening, as we started writing the write-up, we thought that sounded pretty lame, right? So many coaches talk about just change your perspective as if you just wave this magic wand and all of a sudden your brain is different and you just think differently, which to some extent does have some truth, but it's just not that easy. So then we were talking and joking about, well, the real problem is our brain. And then hence the 6-inch problem is the space between our ears, what's going on in our mind. And what we've learned through our many years of coaching is that, yes, you as a leader need to have great skills, conflict resolution, time management, delegation, communication, et cetera, et cetera. However, what we've learned is the real challenge is how you manage your brain. That's what's blocking success, is how well or not you manage your thoughts.
Yeah. And I've always find it really interesting as a coach, listening to other people's perspective and thoughts on things. And we talk about like how vastly different they are between person to person to person, right? Even people of the same family, even people that are married and have been together for a long time, is like, it's so vastly different, which makes relationships and leadership difficult unless we're taking the time to understand them. And number 2, with my clients, is like, why are you choosing to think that? And I guess that came out a little bit snotty, but myself included. Like, why would I choose that perspective for that situation when I have a million other ones that I could choose? Like, what's the benefit of that? So that's what we're going to break down, because last week I was coaching a client and she had very interesting perspectives. Even this morning when I was coaching a client, I was like, why are you choosing that language? Why are you choosing to believe that? It's not benefiting you. It's actually getting you the opposite of what you want. So we're going to break it down, like I said, 6 inches between your ears. Okay. I'm going to go to out of order on our take 5 because we have self-awareness first. We're not starting with that. Let's start with Becky versus Richard. Take it. Take it, Richard.
All right. Well, There's a saying that Rachel taught me. Uh, and sorry, quick sidebar. Most of us know the saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I feel like that's the saying I've known for most of my life. And then a few years ago, Rachel introduced me to what I think is a better saying because it illustrates the part both sides play in communication when there's more than one person. And the saying is, there's what I say and what I mean. There's what you hear and what you make it mean. And I have literally seen this play out to the extent of at the office. This was a story a client told me, was that someone in the office would walk through the morning and say, "Good morning, Rachel, how you doing?" And then the Rachel in the story would say, "I'm fine." And Rachel would then tell me, not this Rachel, this is a fictitious, or this is a real client with a different name to protect the innocent, said, "Oh, that Darren is such a phony. He doesn't give a shit how I feel today." And I was like, isn't that interesting? Here's this coworker walking around saying, "Good morning, how are you?" which sure is a pleasantry. And you make it mean that they're phony and don't care how you're doing. So hopefully I explained that well. I found that story when I heard it so fascinating. And to your point, why would you choose to think that?
Yeah. What's the benefit of that?
Zero.
Exactly. So how does that what does that have to do with Becky and Richard?
All right. So we have two different ways to describe that. So I'll describe the judge. You describe your amygdala. So as I've talked about before, I am a practitioner and certified coach for positive intelligence. It's a book, it's a concept, it's a way of life. It's often described as a life's operating system. And in very simplistic terms, positive intelligence in all intents and purposes says that there's two voices in our brain. There's judge and there's sage. Sage is our wiser self. Judge is all the negativity that we think. And to personify my judge, I have named him Richard, for obvious reasons of the way we shorten Richard. My judge is a dick, screaming at me, cursing at me, telling me that I suck, I'm not good enough, nothing I do is going to work. When things go wrong, it's because I'm involved. That's me at my worst. And so when Richard takes over, and making it personal with Rachel is almost, if I'm hijacked by Richard's thoughts, it almost doesn't matter what Rachel does, because I am so hijacked in my brain. What I think is that she's being insincere, or that she's trying to hurt me, or that she doesn't care or love me, or those types of things, which I know is not true. But I'm choosing the Richard's point of view, which then hijacks me, and so the story goes.
Yep, that is your Richard. And the way I use it in my coaching is not from the judge perspective, but from, we all know that we have an amygdala, and the amygdala is our primitive brain, and its whole point is to keep you alive, to keep you safe, quite frankly, to make it easy, pleasurable, right? The motivational triad. Is it easy? Is it safe? Is it pleasurable? And my amygdala, her name is Becky, and I have all my clients name their amygdalas. So we can start to separate out, like me, Rachel, using my prefrontal cortex, would never think like Becky does. But when Becky is in charge, usually Becky's there to defend herself against Richard. Not always. But in that scenario, right? Like the Becky comes out. So Becky is like, "See, I told you so, and you shouldn't have done that." You know, when you and I are fighting, Becky is the one who's on Zillow looking for a new place to live, and she's already like planning, packing up your things and like kicking you out the door. Like she goes way down the road of protection and just wants to shut you out, right? So Becky has her own views and her own thoughts and her own perspectives that are immediate and reactionary to perceived threat, or when I'm just not paying attention. When I am not like taking the moment to get myself back into like, wait a second, what is this really about? Do I need to go down that road? Do I need to be thinking that way? So Becky and Richard are those perspectives or those versions of ourselves that are habitual and operate under stress or quite frankly, when unregulated. Becky's a bitch. Richard's a dick. You can't be any clearer than that. And neither one of them gets us what we want. Typically. Okay. So how do you see this play out with your clients?
All right, real quick, I want to interject, and then I'm going to include self-awareness as our number 2, which is everybody has a Richard or a Becky. Everybody. So if you haven't named it, which most people haven't, my encouragement is watch yourself, watch your brain, watch your thoughts, observe them. And when you start to get sucked into or hijacked by negative narrative, that is your Richard or your Becky. It has a voice, it has a cadence, it has a style of speech. Maybe it's overt, maybe it's covert, maybe it needles at you, maybe it screams at you, but we all have it. Here's why I want to bring in the self-awareness. If you don't know the voice of your Becky or Richard, you are not as self-aware as you could be. What I see happening with my clients when they don't know the voice of Becky or Richard is they operate on autopilot often. When they operate on negative autopilot, they act defensively, they're aggressive, they don't take action. Very simply put, whatever action they take under normal circumstances requires them to apologize. They're not proud of their behavior or their actions, and it's not becoming of who they are. So their lack of self-awareness about their Becky or Richard is causing them to act out of character, and they don't even know it, or they realize it too late.
Are they really acting out of character, or is their character because they are not aware enough to know any different?
That's a little bit too broad for me. I know what you're saying, but my belief is at the core, we're good. Like, I just have to believe that. At each person's core, they are good. They are sage. They are wise. They are kind. They are loving, compassionate, understanding, etc. And if people are acting in character and are acting like Richard or acting like Becky, I think to your point is they're not self-aware enough to know there's another way to act. But unless you're a sociopath or a total narcissist, my guess is you don't walk around acting like an asshole all day long, every day.
Agreed. I would say for my clients, it's less of that aggressive side of things and more of the almost like a shutting down, a hopelessness, a lot of confusion about why am I doing this? Why can't I make these different decisions? Frustrated in themselves, like this just doesn't feel right, and so they take it internally, and it erodes them more so than sending it externally, like maybe Richard does, hurting other people, attacking other people, and then having to do the apologies. So I see it present differently in myself and my clients. Either way, you got to be willing to look at yourself and understand. Like, you have to be willing to hear your own thoughts, to hear your own Becky and Richard, and not make excuses for it and not shy away from it, and also not make it a problem. Like, I think sometimes my clients too are like, God, I really think that and I really feel that, and they don't want to admit it and they don't want to say the things because somehow there's something wrong with them. It's not. It's just the fact that you have millions of thoughts literally flying through your brain every single day that were created by you, were given to you, that somewhere you picked up along the way. And that it goes to one of our take fives is like, you just need to be more discerning with which ones you're going to choose. That's it. It's not a problem. There's nothing wrong. This is totally normal. So let's talk about the discernment piece of it.
All right, go ahead.
That was the conversation that I had with my client last week. I was like, why are you choosing that? She's like, I don't know. It's just what's in my head. That's just the first thing that popped in. I was like, well, give me like 5 other possibilities, 5 other thoughts too. And she's like, so I had to think about that for a second, right? So she had to go mining in her brain and thinking. And so she came up with 5 other thoughts for the same situation. And I was like, which one do you want? Which one feels better? Which one's going to get you the outcome that you want? And she's like, that one. It's like, not the one that you initially came up. She's like, no, this is the one that feels better. And I was like, this is the power of choice. This is the power of discernment. Is like, you've got a whole buffet table, right? Of all these options. Choose wisely. Choose the one that carries the most weight to get you the best possible outcome. And you get to do that. That is like nobody else can tell you what to think unless you let them. So be discerning. What do you see with your clients? Is this a thing or is this a me thing?
No, you said that well. That was really nicely said. It's an everyone thing as far as I see. The story going through my head is yet another positive intelligence story. And the man that created the concept and wrote the book, his name is Shirzad. And Shirzad shared with myself and other certified coaches a presentation he does. And at one point in the presentation, he calls out the audience and he says, you do not have control of your brain. And he's saying it in a shocking way and hoping to kind of get like the gasp from the audience or the argument like, what do you mean I don't have control of my brain? And the whole point of that story and the whole reason he does it is because if you choose to believe the negative thoughts, if you choose to ruminate on stories you can't change as you're trying to go to bed, then do you really have control of your brain? Like, is that how you want to occupy your time thinking about a conversation from 17 years ago or even 17 minutes ago? Right? So his whole concept is be discerning with your thoughts, take control of your brain. When you start noticing that you're going down negative rabbit holes, pull yourself out as soon as you can. Sometimes we can't do it super quickly. But the farther we go down these holes, the more I think that you're out to get me or you don't care or something that's negative, at my core, I know that's not true. So why would I choose to believe the negativity is true when I know it's not? Which is just like your client. Like the first thought I have is, this isn't verbatim, right? But sometimes it's like, you're out to get me, which is not really a thought, but you know what I'm saying, right? So that's the first thought. But if I really think about it, I'm like, no, that's not the case. Like, what's going on here? And so the discernment is figuring out what I think and feel. Why do I think and feel it? What else is at play? What are other options? What do I know to be true? What am I making true? Which is something you and I talk about too with our clients. Like sometimes they come and tell these stories and there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of emotion. And sometimes the only way to get them on track or back on track is, what is a fact of this story?
It's a great question. I was just thinking as you're saying all those questions would be so beneficial to have in your toolkit as a leader. So when a team member is coming in, right, and they have a story, they have a Becky story, or they have a Richard story, and they're just talking and saying all the things, which in their mind may or may not be true at that moment, but they haven't really been discerning with their thoughts, chose their thoughts. Those are great questions for the leader to ask their employee. Like, what is true here? Number one, what is true? Hands down, that will change the entire conversation, whether you're at work or you're at home, or you're at friends, you're a parent. Last night, we had to deal with this with Lila. Like, what is true? Our daughter, like, what is true about this story? Everything else is the drama. So, great tool for leaders, not only within themselves, but for their employees. And what I was just thinking about that is many times people can't get there on their own, right? When you're too close to something in the beginning, when you're too close to something, it can be hard to be discerning because you only know what you know. But then you bring in a coach and they start to ask you, well, what are the other options? What are the other choices? What's true? They teach you how to be more neutral about your thoughts, to step away, to widen the lens and say, okay, not everything is true. I don't have to be attached to all of these. I don't have to be close to them. Now, which one do I want to pick instead? Kind of like choosing your life partner. Be discerning. So, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing to add about being discerning. I think there's also a fine line with how much or how little grace we give ourselves. And what I mean by this is we all make mistakes. I, for one, put my foot in my mouth regularly. I lose my temper. I do things that are not becoming of the man that I want to be. And yes, I can beat myself up time and time and time again, which I do. But at some point, I need to be forgiven by myself and hopefully the other people that I may have offended. And what I see with some people is, and I'm going to try to make a combo between what I see with my clients and what you say with yours, which is almost like the thought that I think is somehow wrong, or I'm a bad person for thinking my children are annoying me, or I really dislike this direct report of mine, or I think my boss is inadequate in these ways, or I need to do something because someone else is incapable of, or maybe I'm oversimplifying it. But the point is that we all have a lot of thoughts that we then seem to want to, I don't know, it's almost like not forgive them, but make excuses for having the thought as if there's something wrong with it. And at the end of the day, there is discernment with give yourself grace. You have a multitude of thoughts. You have a multitude of things that you do. You make mistakes. You make errors. Maybe you scream and yell at somebody, or you shrink, or whatever the heck it is. But I think part of discerning is also giving yourself grace and giving grace to others.
Which we've talked about having a LinkedIn Live about repair. And that kind of makes me think about, all right, so if that does happen, right? If Richard runs the show for a while or Becky runs the show and there's been harm, how do you repair within yourself, but also how do you repair with the other person? And the repair has to happen in order to build that trust and grow that relationship. Genuine repair, not lip service repair. Yeah, but you got to do it within yourself. Yeah, that's what I'm saying is like, yeah, be discerning, but sometimes, we pick the wrong thought and it doesn't go well. So fix it, and there's nothing wrong with you. All right, which leads me, okay, discerning thoughts. Here's a thought that we've been hearing, or I have been hearing with my clients, is I can't. Bullshit. So good. I'm not in coaching mode right now, but I would also say that to my clients, like, I can't. No, you're either unwilling or you're unable. It's rarely that you can't do something. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm big on the willing and unwilling. I mean, my spiel is often about should, so it's less about can't. But what I often say to my clients is we're not going to do shoulds here. You're either willing or unwilling to do something. And the example I always use is if I'm trying to lose weight and I should not eat a full gallon of ice cream, but I do, clearly I was willing to eat it. So own it. The can't that I hear most often is often about budget, is often about creative solutions to problems, because we've put ourselves in these rigid boxes that we can't do this other stuff. And to your point, it's bullshit. You can, you're just unwilling to do it. Sometimes those shackles, let's say, you put on yourself. Sometimes the shackles are put on by the organization you work for. Sometimes they're put on in the relation or in the context of the relationship or relationships plural that you're part of. But to your point, we usually can, or at least there is a can option, and it's a matter if we're willing or unwilling to do it.
A lot of the I can'ts that I hear are because we are unwilling to experience the outcome of doing, quote unquote, the thing. So, for example, having a conversation with some girlfriends last week, they are in high level positions talking about ill behaved men in organizations. And when I asked, like, well, did you say something to them? Did you bring it to the surface? Did you shine light on it? Did you have the conversation? Did you hold them accountable? You can't do that, because then you're going to be retaliated against, or you can't do that because then you're going to be seen as an aggressive or a bitch or a feminist or whatever it is. I can't do that. That wouldn't be good for my career. I don't believe that. I believe that you can. But if you were to do that, you are unwilling to experience what the outcome might be from that. And quite frankly, in some situations, like, somebody has to do it in order to change the bigger outcome of the picture. But my thing is if you're unwilling to do it, if you want to say I can't or you're unwilling, either way, you don't get to complain about it. If you're unwilling, a lot of clients come to me because their health is compromised. As a functional nutritionist, their health is compromised because of their big career and their big life. And then they tell me when I say, this is what you're going to have to do, right? Like, this is exactly the playbook to get you out of this. I can't do that. I can't ask my husband to pick up the kids. I can't ask my husband to take the kids to the dentist. I can't ask my team to do this, that, or the other thing. Now, of course, I'm going to coach them through it if I can, and they're willing. But at the end of the day, then it's like, then don't bitch about it. Take action or don't, but repetitive complaining about the situation, whether you're the one contributing to it or somebody else is contributing to it, isn't helping anything. And in fact, you're ingraining that even deeper into your neural pathway. And it's going to make it harder and harder and harder to get out of. So that's crap.
I continually be fascinated at the difference between what you hear from a primarily female client base and what I hear from my male clients. I very rarely, if ever, hear from my male clients, I can't. It's not the vernacular I hear. I hear lots of shoulds. Oh yeah, I should do that. Oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. And there is a little bit of a dismissal of it, which is why I'm so adamant on the willing or unwilling when I'm hearing stories. But it's so interesting. Like, I don't hear a lot of can'ts, but you do.
I do. I hear a lot of I can'ts. I hear I hear the should, like a lot of shoulding on yourselves, right? I should do this. I hear, quite frankly, a lot of excuse making. And at the end of the day, it's like, you're just making a problem. Like, I don't want to be dismissive and sound like this cold-hearted person, but at the end of the day, we're talking about high-functioning women who have clearly figured some things out in their lives. So like the things that they're saying that they can't or do, I'm like, this is so out of alignment. Like you're here and you've created all this, and we're talking about this little thing over here, and you're saying you can't, like, there's just a misalignment there. And you're right. Like I'm not. There's so many reasons why. Like there's so many reasons we can't get there. But at the end of the day, it's. I don't. When I have worked with the few male clients I've worked with, I don't hear that either. They're like, okay, I should do it. And then sometimes they hear, I'm not willing to do it. And we move on. We don't make it a problem. We don't take a problem and then stack a problem on top of it.
What I'm thinking about here is there's often a bridge between the unwilling and the willing, or the I can't and I will. And often the bridge is, I don't know how. With some of my clients, when they're not quite sure how to do whatever it is, speak up in a meeting, respectfully challenge their boss, investigate some workplace conflict if that's part of the gig, how to delegate more effectively. I mean, this is a lot of the tactical stuff that I hear. And the unsure of what to do, a lot of times really comes down to a quote unquote talk track. They don't know how to start the conversation. They don't know what to say. I mean, part of it is the self-awareness of the story has some emotion behind it that they know could be triggering. And so if I confront you about the thing and then I get triggered, then they don't have enough trust in themselves to mitigate, to be discerning enough not to then lose their temper or shrink or walk out of the room in tears or whatever their reaction might be. But it's often the talk track that's missing as a first thing to experiment with. And just one other comment on this is that word experiment is really what I lean into with a lot of clients now when they're trying to figure out what to do or to get over the I can'ts or to get over the I shoulds. It's like, great, let's go run an experiment. What does the experiment look like? Who are you going to run it with? What are we hoping to gain from the experiment? What are you actually going to do? And sometimes experiments are really rather safe. Like I'll go try this out with my spouse, which I have a funny story about that. One of my favorite clients, we were talking about the question, what else? Which is a pretty common coaching question. And I said, when you go home and your husband's asking you about your day and you're asking him, whatever, I forgot the context. I said, keep on asking him what else until he figures it out. And I think she said she got through 3 or 4, maybe even 5. And then he looked at me, he's like, what the fuck do you keep asking me that for? So it made me laugh, a little bit of a sidebar. But point of that story is she never said, the way that story started is we talked about that question, what else? And being curious and not telling everybody what to do as the leader, but coaching them. And she's like, yeah, maybe I should try that question. And I was like, all right, no shoulds. Let's experiment with that. Where's a safe place for you to try it? Okay, home with her husband. Great. Run that experiment. And so that the whole point of that story is there's often a bridge that we need to create for our clients or help them find. And the bridge is often some experiment that's tied to a talk track or trying something in a safe environment.
Okay, so yes, agreed. I was trying to tie into like you're saying go do something, but then talk track number 5 is action isn't always the antidote. And I will say I agree. You can either stay there stuck in your head and listen to the I can'ts, I should. Wait, what am I trying to say? I can't, I should listen to Becky's, narrative, all of the things. You can just get hijacked there. Or you can go run these experiments, which I am a believer too. Sometimes, you know what, I'm a big believer in like, you got to process your emotions. You have to be clear on who's running the show upstairs. And you need to get your shit together and go do something. And that doing something does sometimes carry enough weight to break that neural pathway, to break that habitual, to force you into looking at things differently, or like get out of that part of your brain to think about something else. Huge believer. You know, I'm an A-liner. I love doing stuff. And this one was yours, number 5. Action isn't always the antidote.
A little bit of,
So tell me about that.
yeah. So it's just a little bit of a play on the whole saying. Generally, I believe action is the antidote. Go do something. However, sometimes we're not ready. Sometimes there are thoughts and emotions that get in the way. And so the action that many of us think is we're going to go do something physical or say something to somebody or go to a place. That's often when we talk about action, I'll rephrase. That's often when I talk to my clients about action, where they go to. Action can sometimes be observe. You know, some clients of mine that maybe are the first one to speak up in a meeting, and then they dominate the meeting, and then there's no debate, and there's a lack of brainstorming, and they're coming to the coaching with, this happens to me all the time. Well, then the action is don't speak up, but really it's to observe. What happens when you don't speak? Who else speaks? How do you feel? What's the energy inside of you that is like bursting and wants to speak? How do you not speak? Did you feel like the meeting went off the rails? Did it accomplish what you wanted it to, et cetera, et cetera? So action isn't always the antidote in the way that I think most people think about action. Sometimes it's simply observe. Sometimes it's, I mean, even though I went downstairs a couple weeks ago and listened to music, right, which was an action, part of it was to observe my brain. Because the first thing I did when I went downstairs after putting the record on is I was like, what is wrong with you? It was like 8 o'clock in the morning or 7:30 in the morning. It was like, I woke up angry. I was like, you just woke up from sleep. What the fuck is wrong with you? So anyway, I'm going down my rabbit hole. Point being is that sometimes thinking, sometimes feeling the feels, sometimes observing, those are also actions that I don't think align with the traditional action. So that's what I mean. It's not always the antidote, but you got to do something.
I would say with my clients, the women, mostly women that I work with, they are drowning in action. They're doing and doing and doing and doing. And then they're not just doing, but they're also then micromanaging in their heads the doing, and then micromanaging or thinking about what other people should be doing. And they're not, like, I tell them, like, stop. No more A-lining. No more thinking. Not no more, but less A-lining, less thinking. And sometimes it's because if they can just keep busy enough, well, number one, they've created these habits where they think that, like, we've just taken over. We're over controlling, we're overdoing, we're having to prove there's so many things. But number two is, like, A-lining is not going to get you the information you need. It's just doing for the sake of doing to avoid looking at this. It's a great buffer for not having to address the deeper issues that might be going on. And so that, to me, for my clients, is like, action isn't the antidote unless the action is to sit and not do and get an understanding of how, like you said, how are you feeling? Why don't you want to ask your husband to pick up the kids or take them, like all the shit that is exhausting you and burning you out and making you go to work and not be the leader that you think that you want to be, or all of the things. All of that needs to stop so you can actually hear yourself and figure out what you want. Not because somebody else wants it, not because belief system, like, what do you actually want? So I'm a huge proponent of action isn't always the antidote. And in fact, I would encourage less of it for my clients.
All right, so we have just a few more minutes, but I'm going to ask you. So for some of the ladies that you coach that seem to do it all at work and do it all at home, and where action is not the antidote because there's really not much more they could do, or they're not that they're incapable, but it's like trying to put more water into a cup that's completely full, right? Like you just can't do any more. What do you tell them, or what are the things, what are the actions or the inactions that you coach them to do to like quiet the mind, be with themselves, not to keep on doing?
So many things. I think the first thing we have to figure out is why. Like, if you don't know why you're behaving that way, I don't know that we can really, I mean, we can run experiments for sure, but there's always a why. But my experience has been that women don't want to admit the why.
All right, let me stop you.
Okay.
How do you get them to even explore the why?
This sounds really simplistic, but I just have to keep asking them questions.
Okay.
Because they're not asking those questions of themselves. I ask them a lot about how does that feel? Because a lot of women that I work with, they only know a few emotions, and I was one of them included. Mad, angry, well, mad and angry. Like I'm either happy or I'm sad or I'm mad. Like those are the three. But understanding, like, what do you feel in your body? What's happening? I just have to, you have to ask the questions. There's no magic formula. Like a lot of clients will just tell me what to do. Just tell me what to eat. Just tell me what to say. And make it all go away. Just make it all go away for me. It doesn't work. We have to sit there and we have to take the time, and I have to ask you deep, deep questions about why is this happening anyway? What are you avoiding? We just have to explore. I mean, it sounds really coach speak, but I got to get you to the place where you can be honest with yourself. And then there's lots of tools from there that we will go through.
All right, share some of those tools.
Well, like the overwhelm, the prioritize, how to do a time audit, how to do a thought audit, how to do an emotions audit. I recommend the book Fair Play. And that tool, if we're talking about a lack of equality of running a household. A lot of my clients are really good leaders. They don't need as much at work, but they need to figure out the other aspect of their life because there's just, like you said, there's no more spaciousness left. I always recommend, get a good couples therapist. We talk about the emotional jug. You and I have used that a ton in our relationship. If we're talking about how to, change the dynamics at home so you're not going to work thinking about your marriage every single day and it's robbing you of your energy and your mental bandwidth. There's a million different tools that we could dive into.
The thing that I do with some of my clients, just to add to your tools, is a lot of us, me included, maybe you too, we don't want to sit in our shitty emotions. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, like we just don't want to do it. And I avoid it a lot of times. There are times though where I can't avoid it, and it's when life is a little quieter and I'm not doing so much. But conversely I also learn a lot myself and through my clients in the moments when Richard takes over, or I start to notice the irritation. And some of the experiments I run with my clients sometimes is, okay, we don't know exactly what's going on, but it's going to happen, it being whatever the thing is. Like my client yesterday, he notices irritation. And the irritation is tied to he thinks he knows better than everybody else. His way is the right way. And then he's unwilling to accept somebody else's mistakes, but he's willing to forgive his own. So the experiment was, watch when that happens. The next time you see yourself irritated, watch what happens. And he had a big aha. And so I think with your clients too, because I've heard you talk about it, is many of us are not just willing to sit there in a yoga pose and start asking our brain questions and recognizing all the body sensations and things, although some of us do. But it's almost like, how do we plant the seed to create the environment where we can quiet some of the stuff and allow them to hear their brain, to your point? And so I think we've shared a few tools there.
Here's what I'll say. I want to make sure this gets in here. Is I believe you need somebody to help you. Yes, you can learn the tools. Yes, you can read the books. Right? Like, I'm a coach. I've been coaching since, I think my first certification was 2016, of learning cognitive behavioral therapy and coaching to the mind and the science of the brain as well as the body. And I will say the greatest advancements, and I will say even my understanding of you too, like being in a relationship with you, is the greatest growth in the fastest amount of time is when I'm working with a coach, and sometimes a coach and a therapist. And sometimes a coach and a therapist and an energy worker and a Reiki master and a hypnotherapist, like whatever it needs to get me through. However big the obstacle is, the more people I need to bring in. So you have your own tools, and we can only use the tools as far as we can take ourselves. And sometimes that's great, but I'm gonna tell everybody, it's like, you can only go so far. You have to have people to help you, because they're the ones that are going to push you over that hump when things get uncomfortable that you may or may not even recognize in yourself. So go get your people. Us if we're your right people, but maybe not. But that's when you're going to make your greatest growth.
All right. Well said. And we will end on that note. See you next time.
Ooh, see you all next Tuesday.
Bye.
Bye.